Now, we're going to go down to the organizational level. And I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Professor Bill Barnett. Professor Barnett is the Thomas M. Siebel Professor of Business Leadership, Strategy, and Organizations at the Graduate School of Business and the Dorr School of Sustainability here at Stanford, where he is the chair of the Department of Environmental Social Sciences. Professor Barnett is the faculty director of the Stanford Initiative on Business and Environmental Sustainability and the faculty director of the Stanford Executive Program. He's also a senior fellow at the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment. His research looks at the evolution of industries and organizations over time. Currently, Professor Barnett is studying humanity's response to the challenge of environmental sustainability, featuring organizational innovations and adaptations at research sites all around the world. Please help me in welcoming Professor Barnett to the stage.
Well, thanks so much, Keegan, and thanks for that, Sally. I love coming after your inspiring message. Look at you, look at you. Oh my gosh, I see some former students. It took me a while with a couple of you. They were like long stairs, and then we realized. Oh my gosh. So Sally nicely talked about the daunting technical challenge faced by humanity, and the way that we could accelerate the technical response that's required. Now, I'm emphasizing technical because sustainability is a phenomenon in humanity that has to be understood through three lenses. The lens we typically think about, and certainly the one prominent in this room full of ecopreneurs and engineers and scientists, is the technical lens. So well illustrated by Sally's work over her career and the message she brought us. But there's also an important behavioral lens that we have to look through, which Sally alluded to in her last slide, asking a series of questions about whether or not institutions and people will respond in various ways to the technical changes that are necessary. The behavioral lens highlights human behavior at the level of individual humans. That's what we often think of in terms of whether or not people will change the way they live to be more sustainable, but it also operates at the organization level of analysis, organizational change. That's where you entrepreneurs come in. And of course, at the level of whole systems, government policy and social change and economic change. There's a third lens, which we also have to look through, which is the ethical lens, the moral lens, alluded to in one of your questions, Sally, about who might be left behind. It turns out, if you look at the history of human revolutions, revolutions include vast changes seen through all three of these lenses. So the revolution cannot happen only as a technical revolution. The sustainability revolution will happen, and it will happen in a behavioral, a technical, and an ethical way. And let me explain why I can tell you with absolute assurance that it will happen. We're going to take, I wish I could black that out. This slide stresses me out because it's like too many jobs. You know, that's all I'm saying. But if I push this button, it could go haywire. So just, oh, it's fine. I just won't look. I just won't look at the screen here. Here's why I can tell you for sure this revolution will happen. I've spent my life studying industrial and organizational change. We've seen revolutions before. Sally alluded to rates of technical change, but underneath those technical changes were vast institutional changes. There were a number of them. Let me highlight two of them, tell you something about them, and tell you why that makes me so soberly optimistic about the sustainability revolution. Let's talk about the mechanization revolution, for example. You all know about the Industrial Revolution. The mechanization revolution was one of the first chapters of the Industrial Revolution. This occurred at different times in different parts of the world, but it's typically marked as a 19th century phenomenon when large-scale manufacturing completely displaced, disrupted, if you will, trade manufacturing and traditional guild organization. The mechanization revolution was not seen coming by our forefathers and foremothers. It was our grandparents and great-grandparents who suffered through the mechanization revolution. It was incredibly disruptive. It led to the failure of millions of organizations, countless organizations. It led to the rise of social theories such as Marxism to try to make sense out of it. In literature, think Dickens' Hard Times, mass migration from rural to urban to provide labor for mass production, social upheaval such as the world had never seen. And we did not see it coming. We were absolutely blindsided. Let's jump ahead to a revolution that many of you experienced part of. Some people think we're still in it. That's the digitization revolution. This came along in the 20th century. The idea of a disruptive technology popularized by Clay Christensen alluded to the fact that the incumbent organizations don't see it coming. In fact, they see the unit economics of the challenger as not measuring up and put it aside as not viable until, of course, the cost curve comes down like Sally was showing for solar, and then the disruptive technology takes over and the incumbents fail. The notable thing to keep in mind about the digitization revolution is that, like the mechanization revolution, we didn't see it coming. Even the creators of computer technology didn't know where it was going. It completely blindsided us. As bad as we were at predicting, we're great at retrospectively rationalizing, and so we might think this thing was planned, but let me tell you it's not. And the reason we know it's not is look at the organizational failure rate. Again, millions of incumbent organizations failing. The mechanization revolution, the digitization revolution, like all revolutions, were not given permission by policymakers and government. They were not invited. The czar does not appoint a commission to look into revolutionary thinking. They were opposed by the status quo. In answer to your questions up there, Sally, the incumbents will absolutely oppose the technical changes, and I don't have to tell you that, you having been in policy positions. The incumbents will absolutely oppose the status quo. I love it. I teach the freshmen now. It is so fun to teach the freshmen. Because they complain, they say, well, I hear that we can't do this and it's not feasible, and I tell them, I got good news for you. And all these little freshman eyes looking up at me, you know, they're in pajamas. Seriously, well, it's a 10 a.m. class. I mean, if you're going to 10:30 a.m. class that early, of course I'm in pajamas, right? Oh my God, I should teach in pajamas and teach them a lesson. So they wouldn't notice. So I tell them, I got good news for you. When you go home and everybody says that it's not feasible what you're talking about, let me tell you, they're gonna die. That's how the change happens. The death of the people, the death of the organizations, the death of the institutions. But the institutions do not invite the revolution. I'm not saying this to put a humorous edge on my talk. I am telling you literally what will happen. Now, if it was the case that we had rational policymakers like Sally running the world, if we had a technocratic leadership capacity, the revolution would happen much more smoothly. It would be invited in, and many tens of millions of people fewer will die. But that's not how it's going to happen. Let me explain how the sustainability revolution is going to happen and what makes it different from the digitization revolution and the mechanization revolution. This one we see coming. Like, quite literally, we didn't see the other ones coming. This one we see coming. The great acceleration, which Sally put up on the board. All those changes that kicked in at about 1950, we have been tracking. We know absolutely what is happening to the planetary boundaries of the Earth, not only climate, but all the other planetary boundaries. And we're beginning to feel the feedback from the Earth. We can act sooner, and the revolution will go more smoothly, or we can wait, and the Earth will speak more loudly, but ultimately, one way or another, with more deaths or with fewer, this revolution will be here. We see it coming. That means there is a tremendous economic and social opportunity. Now, by talking about that opportunity, I'm not trying to put a happy face on the tragedy of revolution. This revolution should have happened more smoothly, but get over it. This is the way humanity works. Status quo bias is the reality. Even creating this school of sustainability has been a tremendous lesson in status quo bias. The business school has a saying, change lives, change organizations, change the world. I think it should be change lives, change organizations, change the world, but don't change Stanford. Okay, in fact, when I leave here, I can't hang out with you because I got to go back to some curriculum reform debate. And it's like, that's hard? I mean, my gosh, what Sally's talking about should be hard. Anyway, sorry. That's status quo bias. It's always there, and it's not going to stop being there. But because we know where we're going, you as entrepreneurs can skate to where the puck's going to be, right? You have to, you think of where you're going to go, because that puts you where the opportunity is. By the way, Keegan, when you opened up, you said, times are a little tougher now, the little reference to the Trump administration. Let me say two things about current times. First of all, even with technocratic leadership of the quality of Sally, we weren't doing enough before either. Imagine the election had gone the other way and all you women are wearing blazers, right? And I don't know, John Kerry is Secretary of the Interior and you're in Washington. We still aren't doing enough, right? Because you still have status quo bias in the form of all those other institutions. So let me tell you. So yeah, it's a little tough now, but I've got two different papers. You send me an email, I'll give them to you, showing that entrepreneurs who create their organizations when times are tough, they have a lower chance of success, but a much greater rate of growth and financial success conditional on making it through the startup process. It's a basic selection argument. It started with an idea I had in the late 90s when it seemed to me that any idiot could start a business. And so I had a lecture for my MBA students in my entrepreneurship class, which they hated, entitled, When Any Idiot Can Start a Business. My job is not hard at some level, a little econometrics and common sense. So, and it turns out you can predict the fate of a firm based on how beneficent the environment was at the time it was created. Tougher to create a firm, stronger firm comes out the other end. So that you ecopreneurs in this room, it's going to be great. It's going to be hard getting there, but it's going to be great. So because we know it's coming, we can start thinking about the opportunities. And as Keegan said, so I've been going around the world looking at various revolutionaries. I put up just a few here because I knew we didn't have a huge amount of time for me to go through them, but I like to go through individual cases of revolutionaries. None of the revolutionaries I'm going to show you here are being given permission to do this based by regulators. They're doing this in ways, so this, for example, is up in Aalborg, where there's this very interesting wind-powered experimental laboratory to take technical solutions to scale in parallel processing, such as what you described, Sally. That used to be the world's biggest wind turbine. I think the biggest one's now in China. But what's interesting, we're going to come back to this, this is a playing field for creating scalable solutions in a context where the status quo can't resist change. So it's a technical solution being put in place in a way that avoids resistance of the status quo. Another way we can, if we look through the behavioral lens, overcome the status quo bias is to look at visionary companies. This is one of the most visionary companies that's ever existed, the steel company POSCO, which was visionary when it was created back after the war, and came up with the Finex system. They wouldn't let me show the facility that's behind me there, which is hydrogen steel. And once it's green hydrogen, will be absolutely revolutionary. And this is a case of a firm actually disrupting itself. We have a lot of people working on ocean-based greenhouse gas removal without permission of others. And in order to make that work, Peter Domenical and the folks at Woods Hole are putting this system in place to measure the absorption of carbon dioxide in the ocean. Very important technical innovations. But now let's shift to a somewhat more behavioral one. Here I'm on the coast of Chile. I didn't mean for this, by the way, to be a tour through my hat collection, but you know, that's what I'm told this is. So here I am on the coast of Chile, and Professor Fernandez is working with the fisher folk to help them adapt. So part of the status quo bias is not intentional resistance, but it's de facto resistance in the face of only knowing a certain way of doing things. And so those fisher folk are working with Fiorenza Micheli from our oceans department to try to overcome that. This is in the Negev Desert. We're going to take an MBA study trip here. And, but unfortunately, the Gaza Strip is right over there, and so this was not a place I could take the MBAs, it turned out. So we'll do that maybe later. I still go back there. But, Alon here is one of the leading experts on drip irrigation. It was developed there. Many of you know about Netafim, which took drip irrigation all over the world from this beginning, which both increases yields agriculturally and decreases methane emissions. So it's an incredible innovation that we've seen blossom the Negev Desert. And so what's interesting about that innovation is that it's both technical and behavioral in many sense, because you have to get the farmers and the big agricultural interests to go in that direction. Let's talk biodiversity. This regeneration all happened. I'm just relieved there, by the way, that I survived that bridge because there's a gorge under there. They just told me not to step in the hole. So, you know, and there's holes all through there. I don't know what I'm doing this for sometimes, but so all that reforestation happened with traditional and indigenous knowledge. And one of the keys to the behavioral lens on this revolution is understanding the usefulness of what our cultures have learned among indigenous people for so long. Here elsewhere in the Philippines, this is out in Palawan, where Stanford just signed an MOU to work with the government of the Philippines and the Ayala family business to putting research sites all around Palawan, both to look at the sea coral. Here, Manig is his job. He's out there. He stops the fisher folk from dropping dynamite into fish, because that's bad for coral. And so he's showing me where the anyway, this is the coral area. But we're also looking behaviorally at what's happening in those communities to make sure that the tourism development is compatible with their continued well-being. And this brings up, when you look at people in context, this technical solution has to include their lives. So here we're in the forests of Brazil, up near the Rio Negro, between the Amazon and the Rio Negro. The two scientists there are the two women who are explaining to me, and then translating from this representative of the Tucano tribe, that they now harvest these mushrooms that you see on the screen and sell them to especially the Korean and Japanese and Singaporean markets, so that they've stopped, there's no more deforestation going on there. So you see a behavioral compatibility between having a livelihood and maintaining the ecosystem services that the rest of the world likes in terms of the Brazilian rainforest. And Circularity obviously is also very important, and it's interesting to see when the forces of the status quo join in on that. So here I'm at Suzano. Some of you know Suzano, massive paper company, makes about half the world's paper. Suzano plants and cuts down over 1 million eucalyptus trees a day. So in that pause, what's that? About 10,000 eucalyptus trees, right? And so the idea is we have a voracious appetite for paper. Now, some of that paper can be used. In the case of this paper diaper, it has no plastic. And as many of you may be trying to replace plastic, many of the forces of the status quo are also trying to replace plastic, which would be a huge boon to humankind. You know Elephant Tech? They'll be at the Stanford Sustainability Summit in July. Tremendous, it's a 3D printing approach to making circuits. That technical solution was compatible with the interests of the status quo, and so we're now seeing far less waste, better costs adopted ever since Apple decided to make them their circuit manufacturer. The circular economy, we're back again now in Denmark. This is a pyrolysis system that SkyClean is taking forward in a scalable way, and we're trying to match them with producers of agricultural waste so that you sequester the carbon from that waste. Once again, a technical solution that's compatible with the interests of the status quo. But I don't want to leave out the moral lens, because this revolution doesn't happen unless we also include answers to these questions. We have to know that fair solutions are feasible solutions. That means respecting indigenous people and not leaving people behind. Adaptation is already a reality for billions of people today. This is not the future. Here I am with the Mapuche people in Chile. Millions of people live in this part of Chile, the Mapuche Nation, which was set aside as an actual nation at the inception of the state of Chile. And their indigenous knowledge allows them to operate compatibly with the environment, but is opposed to many of the development moves taken by large multinationals in that part of Chile. And if we forget the Mapuche people, the resistance to change will prevent the revolution from going forward. Here we're back in the Philippines again. You know, one of the things about these relationships is you have to keep going back. You have to maintain these relationships. We have a bad reputation in America for one and done visits, so I go back and visit Rizal whenever I'm in Manila. He's down in Pasig, Marikina. It's very poor and no destitute poverty, because the beauty of Philippine culture is that people look out for each other. And here he's showing me his store. This is the same spot 2 weeks later, after the super typhoon. What they call adaptation is the installation of that second floor. So you can go up there while 12 feet of water are flowing out of the Pasig River. And the pollution involved in that, and the disease and the destitution that results in terms of its effect on humanity, makes this an intolerable example of what's going on all over the globe, which we also have to build in from an ethical perspective. So working with the local government there in Manila and those local authorities, the shopkeepers restored their operations, as you see here. This is the following year. I'm there with Rodolfo Durso, and there's Rizal again with his wife. Now, if you look in Rodolfo's sunglasses, do you see the people reflected in his sunglasses? It's an MBA study trip, right? I mean, Rodolfo puts it well. He says, Bill is trying to infect them with what we do. And that is exactly right, Rodolfo. We're trying to infect the MBA students. I hope some of you are here. Another super typhoon hit after that, and it's been tough there. This was me in Indonesia a few months ago. That white, that's dead coral. And that dead coral was dumped there by the development agency that decided, thinking purely technically, that it would be good to have a port there, forgetting that that coral is the center of the thriving ecosystem that provided the fish for Asmania and her people of Pari Island to live. And when I told Asmania that I wanted to tell her story, I said, "How do I address you?" She said, "You can address me as a leader of the defenders of Pari Island." It shouldn't be that our institutions cause us to have to fight against them for the well-being of people who have always lived in harmony in these places. When we look at this revolution through an ethical lens, we also include the interests of the poorest among us. We know the revolution is coming, and so I can make this prediction. The 20th century may have been, and it was, when we mastered mass production and consumption. But the 21st century is when we will master sustainable production and consumption. And you young people in the room will therefore be known as the greatest generation. And you entrepreneurs will be seen as visionary. Thank you very much.